Today I'm going to talk about the dominant 7 chord. I'm going to talk about what it is, different voicings, and then the 2 ways to use it. So the dominant 7 chord is when you take a major triad, which is just the root, 3rd, and 5th, and you're adding another note. That note is the flat 7. So for a G major here, you take the 2nd G note down here, the octave, and in this shape you just take your pinky off, and now you have F, which is the flat 7. And that gives you that dominant chord, that dominant sound. Now I think it's important whenever you learn a chord to know a couple different voicings. That helps tremendously, especially when you're playing with other people. If you have 2 or 3 guitarists, you all don't need to be playing these big chunky chords. It's very helpful if people can play different inversions and different hold-ins of them. And I think that's very also helpful if you're just comping behind somebody playing lead. And that's why I have a picture of Bob Weir on my wall. Everybody always wants to be Jimi Hendrix or, Jerry Garcia, but it's often the players behind them that are making them really take it to the next level. And I'm very guilty of just trying to, play lead and take up a lot of space, when I think it's almost sometimes more important to work on stuff that makes your bandmates sound better. So to do that, you need to know different voicings. So when you're learning different types of way to play this chord, there are really 2 things that are important. One is the order of the notes. For instance, this is root, 5th, 7, 3rd, 5, 7. And the other is where it is on the fretboard. Down here it's going to sound a lot thicker than say up here. So knowing the order of the notes and then the thinness of it will help you better find the spots within your band or the song where it'll sound best. So I think there's 2 main shapes to start with. So the first one, the most common one that people know, is this E-shaped G chord here, and you take your pinky off, and then you have that G7. Another way to play it, if you're playing thumb over the top, is to just throw the thumb here and then play like a little triangle thing here. I think the next most important shape is this one here. So this is G7 up here, and it's great because it's a little snappier, it's a little cleaner, it'll cut through the mix better. And I think that's not only because of its place on the fretboard, but I think the voicing of it, that note order makes a big difference. Because you have root, and then you have the 3rd, and the flat 7, and the root. So that 5th doesn't get in there and muddy it up a little bit. Whereas here you have a much thicker sound with that 5th there. Which sometimes you need that sound for songs. And if you're into caged, what you should know about this is just a C-shaped G7 chord. So you remember when we first learned the blues with these big cowboy chords? Remember this B7 here? That's the same thing. So if you pretend like your index finger is the fret, you just move that here. But then you make it more economal. Economal, I'm not sure if that's a word. That. So then there's 2 ways to use the dominant 7 chord. The first way is just for the sound, which is how a lot of chords are used, but that'll make sense when I describe the second one. So what the G7 sound gives you is that flat 7 gives you almost kind of a minor lean into it. It's a little almost minor sounding. And then this 3rd keeps it major. And then when you play both of those, you get that tritone, which is very very unique and usable sound. So this sound is probably familiar because it's used all over the blues and country and soul. And if you just play the 12 bars blues, it's not a Western diatonic scale. Like, you can't explain the 12 bar blues with Western music theory because they're all 7th chords, and that does not fit in any diatonic key. And the benefit of that, when it's just more about the sound, is it frees you to focus more on melodies that can be both major and minor. I feel like B.B. King is always the best at that. You'll see it in other genres where people will just vamp on it just for the sound. That sounds a lot different than if you play the whole G. Or if you play like G7, that G7, the G dominant 7. Has a pretty awesome sound to it. So the second way to use a dominant 7 chord is as what they call a secondary dominant. And what that means is you're using the dominant 7 chord not just for the sound, but to get you somewhere else. So it's what they call like a functioning chord. And it's a secondary dominant when the dominant 7 chord is a 5th away from where you're wanting to land. So if you're playing G7, G dominant 7, it's going to push you to C major. An easy way to do this on guitar is you take wherever you want to go. If you want to land on C, it's always going to be a 5th away. So if you take that old classic power chord that we all know and love, it's a 5th away, then you know it's G, and then you know that the secondary dominant is going to be there, and that's going to push you to here. The reason why is you have 2 notes moving just a half step in opposite directions. So when you're playing this G7, you have the 3rd here, which then moves a half step up to become the root of C. And then below it, you have the flat 7 of G7, which then moves down to become the 3rd of C. So you have this movement here, that dissonant tritone. See, that doesn't really feel resolved. And then that is. And the reason why that is great is because you can use it before any chord. It doesn't even have to be like diatonic and fit in a scale. If you're going from C to, C major to B flat minor, you just throw the secondary dominant. So I know this is B flat minor. I know 5th away is going to be this F right there. So I'm going to go. And it just kind of helps you land there. And it doesn't matter what chord it is. If you just throw that secondary dominant, it'll set it up nicely. And that's great for songwriting. Sometimes when I'm writing a song, I can't quite figure out how to get it back to the start of the progression smoothly. So I'll figure out what the secondary dominant is and get there first, and then that just kind of pushes me there. As I mentioned earlier, this shape's really important. The reason why this shape is great is because you can just keep your ring finger there and it guides you right to that next chord. Whereas if you did a G7 here, it's not quite as smooth, I think, at least. I feel like that one has a little bit more tension leading to better resolution. So I would take some time, learn some different G dominant 7 voicings, the second thing I would do is get used to that dominant 7 sound. Just put on a vamp, put just a G7 in the looper pedal, and then work on hitting some major sounds and some minor sounds. So that way you can get a little more used to that ambiguity of that chord. And then you can start to pay attention to secondary dominance and get your head around kind of that push of that dominant 7 there to this chord, to that major